So, friendship and social media. Is virtuous virtual friendship possible? Well, this question certainly has a pressing and immediate importance today, and it's all of us have to reckon with this in various ways according to our state in life. And it's a tough topic. I have to admit, in preparing for this, I think about these things often. I talk about them with my students often. It's, as Aristotle says, the more that you descend into kind of the concrete particularities of life, the more tricky it gets to discern exactly how to apply universal principles. A philosopher, at the end of the day, is about first trying to make clear the universal principles that stand behind our reasoning, and then to make some suggestions as to how they might be applied. So just to tell you right up front, this is not going to be where I'm going to roll out the concrete plan. This is exactly what should be done in this area, because it's a delicate matter that very much is a matter of the virtue called prudence, which is all about taking universal principles and applying them in various concrete circumstances. So my hope is to be able to give you certain universal principles that will make a difference in helping you think concretely about these troubling, difficult issues that we can come to some good discernment about. We just have to be willing to make the effort. So first of all, just a couple of kind of parameters. My main question here will be, how do we approach making the concrete, practical decisions about friendship and virtual activities? I mean, to answer the question that the title asks, is virtuous virtual friendship possible? I'd say, to some extent, the answer is obviously yes. There can be virtuous virtual friendship, at least to some extent. But then, on another level, the answer pretty clearly is no. And so, again, what we're primarily going to do is try to sort out in what sense is it yes, in what sense is it no, and then again to give the principles that will help us be able to think about how to kind of navigate that in a concrete way. Let me begin with a few basic principles about virtuous friendship, because it's virtuous friendship they're interested in. And let me say this, this is not a lecture about how to navigate the troubled issue of using technology, communication technology, virtual technology in our life in general. What we're going to say here about how it applies in the realm of friendship, I think will also be very helpful in thinking about many other areas of life. I just want to say my focus is precisely thinking in terms of this central aspect of human life, virtuous friendship. Reminder on what we mean by that. We have to go back to Aristotle here and distinguish three basic kinds of friendship: the friendship of utility, the friendship of pleasure, and then the friendship of virtue. Friendship of pleasure, basically people who enjoy spending time together. There's a certain shared life, but it doesn't run very deep. It's basically about enjoying being together in various and sundry ways. Utility friendship, it's a relationship where each is helpful to the other in various and varied aspects of life. Again, this doesn't run very deep. It is what it is, and it's not what it's not. There's a very important place in life for pleasant friendships and utility friendships. The third kind of friendship is what we often will call true friendship. It's not that the other ones don't have any place. It's not that they're bad. It's not that they're phony. But true friendship is friendship in the sense of the real item. That when we think about friendship and how we were designed for friendship, it's this kind of friendship that we're particularly talking about. And this is a friendship that is rooted in moral character. This is rooted in being a person of a certain kind. This is especially rooted in being virtuous. This is exactly how Aristotle puts it. So this is a relationship that's about living a truly good human life together. Two people who know one another well, love one another well, unselfishly, and are committed to helping one another become their true selves. Another way of saying that is to grow in virtue. And these two want to be doing this together, not just kind of, hey, I want you to go over there and flourish. I want to be an essential part of your flourishing. I want to be in this with you. A key thing to be recognized here is that this kind of friendship is only possible with a small number of people. So at this point, it's not the time and place to be going into a lot more about what we mean by virtuous friendship, which is a very important thing to do. But I just wanted to give that thumbnail sketch, so just kind of setting the parameter. It's particularly in view of trying to cultivate this most important kind of friendship. I'm going to kind of lay out here the issue of, okay, with all these kinds of basically virtual communication and presence, these virtual technologies, with all the things that are now available to us, how should we think about those in relationship to the project of being intentional about growing in true friendship? Right? That's the rubric under which I'm going to be considering these technologies. Again, I think some of the things we say about these technologies will apply to other issues, but it's that one on which we're focusing. So this is how I'm going to divide what I'm going to do. There's 5 things, we might say, to attend to in friendship. This is my list of 5, very much rooted in Aristotle and St. Thomas Aquinas, as well as in St. Alarid, the great medieval theologian who writes much about friendship. And those 5 areas are meeting a possible friend, discerning friendship, growing in friendship, maintaining friendship, and then the flourishing of friendship. I'll say those again. I prefer a list of 3, but we needed 5 here. So don't worry, we'll keep it tight. Meeting one another, discerning, growing in friendship, maintaining friendship, and then finally, in a sense, most importantly, the flourishing of the friendship itself. In looking at each of these, I'll tell you briefly what I mean by them. I think it will be rather clear. I will share a principle or two about virtuous friendship in the context of looking at each of these. And I'll give a quick reflection or two about virtual communication and its connection to that aspect of virtuous friendship. And I hope in the end to have conveyed some very worthwhile things that how to think about how virtuous friendship fits together with the realm of the virtual or not. Meeting. First of the 5, meeting. Principle. Somehow we need to find people of like mind and heart. Somehow we need to find people of like mind and heart. You know, I think many tend to see this today as an area of genuine chance or luck. Just, oh gosh, you know, this guy got lucky that he met those people or didn't meet someone to be friends with. But for Christians, nothing, first of all, ultimately is accidental. Further, in reality, the realm of meeting people, while there are elements in there that can seem accidental, fortuitous, it is a realm that to a large extent is in our control. More on that in a moment. Another principle, though, I want to articulate here is a very beautiful, one of my favorite ones from St. Alarid. He says, God is at work in all of our friendships, inspiring affection for one another. There's something very powerful and beautiful here, particularly in view of St. Alarid's conviction that all human friendship ultimately is ordered towards friendship with God. But this incredible notion that God is providentially concerned about the details of our relationships, and His providence has been at work in part inspiring people to kind of turn towards certain others. What is it that sometimes just seems very fortuitous? Why was this person moved by this person? St. Alarid is pointing out very often God is more intimately at work there than we might have realized. Beautiful thing, I think, to keep in mind. But these are tough times as regards trying to meet people of like mind. I lecture a bit on friendship. And one of the most common things I hear is the kind of soul-felt sigh of, if only I could find someone, if only I could find people that want to do this friendship thing that you're talking about, they say to me. Right? These are tough times. With the decay of political society, decay of culture, the decay of households, as well as the decay of all those other kind of intermediate communities in human life, many are going to find it harder to find the context, to find people of like mind. This issue, by the way, is prior to any issue of really getting to know one another, which we're going to come to in a moment. In question here is simply coming into contact with people with whom we might be interested in pursuing something deeper. For starters, surely there are reasonable steps we can take to improve our chances of meeting good people. For example, seeking out good communities, staying close when fitting, other discernment involved, maybe to family and relatives, going to good schools when feasible, seeking employment among people of like mind. These are things we should be more intentional about when even deciding where we're going to live, among whom we're going to live. We should have this very much in mind for ourselves, our children, other people in our life. Are we thinking, are we remembering that being around people that will be a reasonable pool for finding people of like mind is something very important? This said, I suggest that in this area, the area of meeting people, the first of our 5, we absolutely can use virtual connection to expand or improve the pool of people that we might meet. Here we can bear in mind G.K. Chesterton's principle that I really like. G.K. Chesterton was no great fan of jumping into using technologies just because they're there. That much is for sure. But he does hold that we can intelligently, often, use technology to help address or solve or overcome certain problems that other technologies have caused. I think that is exactly what's going on here as regards meeting. We do have real problems in this area that we're discussing. We just were pointing out some of them. And some of these problems that we have as regards meeting people have been caused by virtual communication technology. Quick list worth considering. The loss of manners and other traditional forms of human interaction, which actually are very important and helpful in meeting people of like mind and being able to begin to start to get to know them. Those have been undermined. We have more habits of shallow, may I say, all too easy communication. We lack silence. We lack the context to be alone or recollected. We're extremely mobile, and consequently, we're unstable often in where we live or in the communities that we're attached to. So there's a general kind of isolation that many of us suffer that's very much connected to modern technologies. So using the G.K. Chesterton principle, these are certain problems that have been, if not created, in case exacerbated by modern technologies. But what are we going to do now? If virtual communication can help us meet good people of like mind, then this is a good thing and is worthy of careful consideration. Quick example, a good service that probably you, like me, know a number of people who have found their spouses through a kind of Christian matching service, right? Hey, we're living in tough times. Hard to meet people. Here's some place where I think it realistically should be noted. A savvy, intentional use of these virtual technologies can reasonably expand the pool of being able to meet people of like mind. I go on to my number 2 area, discerning friendship, discerning. At risk of confusing you with another list, I want to tell you St. Aelred's 4 steps in growing in friendship, and then I'm going to tell you how I'm taking 2 of those and I'm conflating them into this that I'm calling discerning. St. Aelred talks about you first have to choose with whom you're going to go deeper. Then you have to test, is this going deeper really going to work or not? And then after that, okay, we accept one another into a deeper friendship and we live it out. The first 2 are the ones St. Aelred really focuses on, and I'm taking both of those and I'm putting them together into this very important one I'm just calling discerning, what he called choice, first just figuring out, is it worth going deeper or not with this person? Once that's determined, he then said, okay, then you're going to go on and be testing it. Well, both of those are a kind of discerning. So I'm combining those into discerning. This is after having maybe met someone, number of people, reasonable pool of people of like mind. We need to be discerning. Who among these seems to be someone I can go deeper with? And then further then, when I start to go deeper, how can I get to know this person well to see whether this is really going to work or not? Principle. You really need to get to know a person, his temperament, his character, his principles, his story, his interests. This is more difficult than most of us realize. I love to say to my students, how many people do you think really know you? Really know you? Look at that from the other side. How many people do you really know? Temperament, character, principles, his story, his interests. Much is at stake here. Much is at stake because of the nobility of this reality called virtuous friendship. Implied here is something that we can't defend or expound upon any length, but we need to take as given. It takes a certain kind of person to do this. The tradition is unanimous on this. It requires certain things of us. It requires certain things of the person we're going to go deeper with. So this whole realm of discerning is a deep, critical matter of really getting to know the person in really all of the most important aspects of this person's life. I'm going to read you right now several quotations from St. Aelred and a quick one from St. Thomas that show how this to them is absolutely central. Then we'll connect it to the question of the realm of the virtual. St. Aelred, since a friend is the partner of your soul, and he means virtuous friendship here, the deeper friendship, what he calls spiritual friendship. Since a friend is the partner of your soul, to whose spirit you join and link your own, and so unite yourself as to wish to become one from two, to whom you commit yourself as to another self, from whom you conceal nothing, from whom you fear nothing, surely you must choose, and then test, and finally admit someone considered right for such a trust. End quote. Next, especially in choosing and testing, remember that's St. Aelred's duo, especially in choosing and testing a friend, we should take precautions, if possible, not to set our hearts too quickly. One more from St. Aelred. Great distinction he makes here. How many do I love? Here it kind of really means with Christian charity. How many do I love to whom it would be indiscreet to bear my mind and open my heart in this way? So broad realm of people that I have a real love for. Very narrow with whom I can go deeper and share myself. I go on. Now, how many do I love to whom it would be indiscreet to bear my mind and open my heart in this way, since they are not old enough, mature enough, or discreet enough for such intimacies? Here's St. Thomas now in his commentary on the Nicomachean Ethics of Aristotle. Further, such friendship requires time and familiarity. As the proverb says, men cannot know each other till they have eaten salt together, nor can they admit each other to friendship or be friends, and he means in that richer sense, till each has been found lovable and been trusted by each other. Those who quickly show the marks of friendship to each other wish to be friends, but are not friends unless they both are lovable and have come to know that fact. For a wish for friendship may arise quickly, but friendship does not. In other words, true friendship, virtuous friendship, takes time and shared experience. This is one of two reasons that Aristotle gives for why virtuous friendship is very rare. The other is that virtue itself is all too rare. But even given that persons are virtuous, it still takes a long time and is very arduous just to get to know one another. It cannot be taken for granted. I dare say, especially today, where we're lacking the conducive, stable contexts, really to share our life, such as to really to get to know one another. This is a really important point. At stake is friendship itself. A few thoughts on the virtual aspects. Being virtually together is to be together in a sense, but it's not truly to be together. It's not full human presence, though it's a kind of presence. Imagine marriage virtually, or parenting virtually, or real friendship virtually. I'd like to suggest to you that that trio ought to all have the same ring to us. Imagine marriage virtually. We kind of go, oh. Imagine parenting virtually. Imagine real friendship virtually. Real friendship is enacted by living together in reality. Real presence, virtual presence. We need to know the difference. We need to feel the difference. We need to remember the difference. There are many factors at work seeking to undermine our perception of the difference. There's something intuitive here. It has to be discovered in experience. Let us approach with caution and humility and try to see. A couple things I'd like to note about virtual presence right here. There's more room for posturing, as we all know, and tailoring how one appears. This has often been pointed out. I bring this up now in the context of this can be obviously a real hindrance to getting to know one another. And in context here, we can't emphasize how serious a point that is, given the richness. It's one thing to say, yeah, I got to get to know the person. No, I'm asking you to think with Aristotle, St. Thomas, St. Albert here. I mean know the person. So anything that in any way is going to encourage kind of posturing, appearance over reality, is a serious red flag, a serious issue. Second quick point. Generally, we don't see a person virtually in the real contexts of life, the real context that would reveal his character as it is. Connected to that, we can't observe a person, can we? Nearly so closely. Friendship is about knowing and being known. We must not forget, what does it take to really know another human person? I think that we tend to be unrealistic about this. And we don't think clearly about what it takes. Can you still really, in some sense, get to know someone through virtual contact? Well, of course, yes, somewhat. But then ultimately, of course not. Just there. Of course, yes, to some extent. Of course not. Just there. In the end, to know someone, we must live together. A phrase I'm going to use again and again, because what Aristotle and St. Thomas use again and again. A rich phrase. We have to keep reflecting on what it means. Live together. What is real human living together? We're not thinking clearly. We contemporary human persons. I don't think we're thinking clearly about what real human life and real human living together is. So in this area, our second area, the discerning area, I'm going to give virtual communication low marks. Limited utility, some utility. Third area, growing. This is perhaps the most central for us. How do we go deeper? How do we really move forward with those we want to move forward with? So this is taking for granted that we've discerned, this is really worth rolling up our sleeves here. We've already started to get to know the person. Now we're really going to be trying to move forward and grow a friendship here. Principle. Again, True friendship consists in living the good life together. For human persons, this means living virtuously. Virtuously, good life, fundamentally here, same, which always includes growing in virtue. Living virtuously always includes growing in virtue. There's no such thing as being in this life perfect in virtue. So the virtuous are precisely the ones that are seeking most of all to grow in virtue. So virtuous friendship is especially about growing in virtue, especially through the causality, the instrumentality, the aid of our virtuous friends. In God's great providence and God's great gift to us, this is what the wise are seeing. Central, St. Aelred, St. Aelred calls spiritual friendship, he calls it the highest step towards perfection. This rare kind of friendship is this uniquely powerful gift of God to help forge us into whom we're called to become. So we really need to focus on growing together in friendship is really the same thing here as growing in virtue. Consider quickly why friendship is a context and a cause of growth in virtue. Friends give great example to one another, a unique kind of close example that you can observe very closely. There's special inspiration and motivation to one another. In such a relationship, you're especially inspired and moved. I want to be better for that person. Friends are one of the most uniquely powerful instances of taking counsel. Someone who knows you so well and loves you so well, this is the type of person we need to be able to take counsel with. Boy, in so many things in life we need to take counsel, don't we? Our virtuous friend is key for that. Finally, perhaps most powerfully, holding one another accountable. Something so rare, so powerful, so beautiful, so much to be sought. Someone that I can trust who will hold me accountable and who will honor me by asking me to hold him accountable. This is an incredible natural means of growing as a person, as growing in virtue. All right, so there's a couple key principles then about growing in a virtuous friendship. Can I do these things virtually? In some sense, of course. And indeed, when fitting or when necessary, we should. But let's look deeper. In the end, I think we can say the virtual presence is always ancillary, from the Latin word ancilla for handmaid or servant. Right? Virtual presence is always ancillary. What do I mean by that? I mean two main things. Virtual presence is always second best. It's inadequate precisely because it's not the real thing, period. Secondly, it always calls for and points to real presence. By its very inadequacy, it's calling for it, pointing towards us, pointing toward it. So no, this virtual presence, it can be fine. And it should be used, I'd say, in various circumstances, but it calls for our being very alert and aware of its shortcomings and of its differences from real presence. Indeed, I suggest to the extent that we are really aware of this, of the difference between virtual presence and real presence, of the shortcomings of virtual presence, to the extent that we're really aware of that, it's actually that person who will be in the best position to utilize virtual presence best. The flip side of that, of course, is this. To the person that is overly enamored of virtual presence, not having a sense of not having a strong sense of its real shortcomings, it's that person, I think, is going to be less capable in a more dangerous situation of trying to utilize it on the path to true friendship. As regards then growing, I give virtual presence / communication, again, rather low marks. Not without any utility, but rather low marks, because if we'd gone back, we've looked at that aspect of really being able to take counsel, really being able to inspire one another, really holding one another accountable. Can it go on there virtually? Absolutely, to some extent. Absolutely, to some extent, but in a limited way. in a rather limited way. I'm now at maintaining, our fourth of the five, maintaining. Maintaining friendship at a distance is an issue of particular importance in our mobile society. More so probably than ever before, because it's probably by far the most mobile society, generally speaking, in history. Aristotle has a couple great principles for us. He distinguishes between the habit and the act of friendship. And in doing so, it's simply this. He does it when he raises the question, can you be friends at a distance? Great answer. Make a key distinction. Well, if you're apart from one another, you still can call one another friends because you have an habitual disposition towards one another. So you have the habit of friendship. But if you're at a distance from one another, you're not able to do the act of friendship. Remember, the act of friendship is what we already called really living together. So yes, at a distance you can have the habit of friendship, but you can't actually be enacting it. Then he goes and he makes a second point, which is a very important one. He says, a technical point, habits are maintained by the same actions that originally formed them. Habits are maintained by the same actions that originally formed them. Think of something like courage. The kind of actions that form you into being a courageous man, the same ones that maintain courage. Well, same thing here in friendship. The kind of actions, the living together that's the root and the basis of forming a habit of friendship is also that which has to maintain it. And so this is why then he says at a distance, friendship can only last so long. Isn't this so true to experience? If you cut off the act of friendship, the habit will only last for so long. But now with these technologies, we have a fascinating philosophical issue we only can spend a moment on here. What is distance? See, for Aristotle, distance was a very clear thing. When we're at a distance from one another, say I'm in this country, you're across the water in another country, we can't live together. We can't share in any real human life together, so we don't have the act of friendship. We're simply at a distance. But whoa, now we have these technologies. Is there any such thing as distance anymore? We can be, I will put it this way, tempted to think that technology simply overcomes distance, and now you can be friends at a distance in a sense because there is no distance anymore. We have a subtle point here, ladies and gentlemen. I am certainly not going to be the one to say, let's not use virtual communication to overcome distance when we are separated from our loved ones. I'm often going to be first in line saying, hey, I'm glad to be able to communicate virtually with friends or loved ones when, for various reasons, we need to be at a distance from one another. So clearly, that's going to be something here in a second, wrapping up maintain. I'm going to say, hey, this is something we absolutely are going to want to think in terms of. So to some extent, virtual communication can overcome distance. This is real, though it's virtual. It's significant. It can be a real gift to maintain contact in this way. Absolutely. But let's distinguish. The use of the real here. We use the term real. Watch. Real versus virtual. This is the key distinction we've already noted. Virtual presence is not real presence. Real versus virtual. Real versus virtual. Most important distinction. But here's another one, real versus phony or deceptive. These are not the same distinction. Virtual presence is not real according to the first distinction. We must maintain the distinction between real presence and virtual presence. But I'm not saying that virtual presence is necessarily phony. No, virtual presence can be a real presence versus a phony or deceptive one. I'm communicating with a friend or a loved one through some type of audio-visual technology at a distance, we are to some extent truly a kind of real presence. This isn't simply phony. And in that way, it can be a real way of continuing to stay in touch with one another and communicating with one another. But at the same time, real presence it is not. So we must reckon with the caveats noted a moment ago about virtual communication, remembering that it is, again, ancillary. We said second best. It's not fully real. It always calls for and indeed demands the real, kind of pointing to it. One further thing I want to point out, a certain danger in virtual communication / presence. two dangers. The replacement factor. What would we be doing otherwise if we weren't doing this virtual presence or communication? Quick example. Email is a common one, important one, very instructive. Email versus letter writing. Right? It's a little bit of an old-fashioned one. Email is what it is. It's a real way, obviously, of communicating. One of the aspects that was not considered about email is the replacement factor. That if you do this, what will you not be doing? We have lost the art of letter writing because of the replacement factor. That now that we can do this, we are not doing a whole set of other things. This, by the way, applies to so many technologies where we don't think about the things that we're not doing. Gosh, I was just on the airplane watching little children. I remember when I was on an airplane as a child. If you fly from coast to coast, you know, you played cards. You had to figure stuff out. You had to figure out how to get along with people, how to do a whole set of things. It's now simply bloop, turn on the video. I mean, this is universal. Think of the replacement factor. Think of the whole set of things that are not being done because of what is being done. So this is what I'm saying is a danger of all these ways that are not real presence, they're just virtual presence. What kind of things that might have better served in some way real presence than the virtual presence does that will be set aside. Second quick danger, it's very closely related. It changes our habits. It changes our expectations. Quick example, we become accustomed to the constant check-in. We become accustomed to the constant check-in. Why aren't you messaging me? I need to see you. Is it possible that it actually makes the relationship more shallow? By having an unreasonable expectation, might we have been actually developing a certain aspect of our relationship at a distance if we weren't checking in? Just something for thought. There's many intangibles here. We need to learn to use our intuition on this. Part of this will be listening to the wise and maybe the older and things that it's hard for them to articulate, but they've seen it. As I noted then, wrapping up there, in the section on meeting, I think that there here too can be a very legitimate use of virtual communication in friendships. Again, we're applying the G.K. Chesterton principle. We have a great challenge of mobility and separation now from people that we love. So yes, let's at times, as appropriate, in a limited, reasonable way, use these virtual connections. My suggestion, don't go overboard. Don't make the mistake of trying to maintain more contact than is reasonable, than is feasible, than is even on a human scale. But use it sparingly. Finally, flourishing. Flourishing. Here I mean the full-fledged living out of friendship. This is what friendship is aiming for. Those who have grown in virtue have now, they've been growing, they still never stop growing in virtue, but now this is a very mature relationship. It's nice to remember this. Maybe in this life, not many of us will get to this, but we sure can try. The flourishing of a friendship, what does it look like? This should be informing all the other stages we've been talking about. I came in reading St. Thomas's commentary on the book of Job to an amazing line that I'm just going to pluck out of context and read to you. Human living together, he writes, consists primarily in seeing and being seen. Human living together consists primarily in seeing and being seen. I think we could say virtuous friendship consists ultimately in its flourishing, in seeing one another and seeing other things together and being seen by one another. Human life, seeing and being seen. This is a richly analogous usage, but it begins and is rooted in the sight of the eyes, in physical presence. Why in physical presence? Remember this, at root, In a real way, I'm going to go philosophical with you really quickly, many of the vagaries of modern thinking goes back to Descartes' severing of sensation from the sensed world. Descartes said, how do we know that sensation is not a dream? He questioned the reliability of our senses to get in contact with the real world. Key response from the tradition, in sensation you are in direct contact with reality. This is absolutely philosophically key to the realistic tradition, especially the Aristotelian Thomistic. It's a key principle in good philosophy. Our senses provided with an irreplaceable foundation for all human knowing, precisely in their being in direct contact with the real. In what we call virtual reality, ladies and gentlemen, you're in direct contact with something, and it's not the real world, other than the electronic devices that we're using. Our contact with reality here is mediated. This is the truth of the situation. We know it, and we feel it. The main issue here is not maybe there's a distortion in the mediation, although that is a real issue. The issue is real contact and presence, period. There's something intuitive here. Human living together consists primarily in seeing and being seen, with real contact rooted in the senses, not restricted to the senses. Think of the friends in real presence with one another. Think of the married couple in real bodily presence. It goes way beyond what the senses perceive, but it's rooted. We're rational animals. It's rooted in what the senses perceive. Anything that makes us doubt the root priority of the senses, I assert, is undermining it and undermining human life. Quick reflection. Why is there such a push for more and more virtual reality? Is there a good reason for the constant push towards it? I'm going to be a little strong on this here, a little in your face, ladies and gentlemen. I suggest usually there's not a good reason for the very strong push towards more and more. Often, maybe we should just consider saying no to the push that is constantly coming. Say no to that and say yes to reality. Part of this is we need to be realistic and aware. Aren't they, in some sense, trying to sell us something? Do we really doubt there are strong forces at work that will continue to push us further and further into virtual reality? And these forces are not thinking in terms of the true human good. They will tell us, they'll tell us we need more communication. They'll tell us we'll be able to be in contact with more people. May I assert this to you, ladies and gentlemen? We don't need more communication. We need better communication. We don't need more friends. We need better friendships. Quick analogy from St. Augustine. All right, we got to wrap up here. Quick analogy from St. Augustine. To talk about temporal goods that God has given us as a gift, he says it's like a ring that the beloved gives to his wife. And he said, this is how God has given us the temporal goods. But he says, what a deformation, what a disorder it would be if the wife takes the ring, and rather than taking it as a sign of the real love of the spouse, gets obsessed with the ring. So here, ladies and gentlemen, I think it is a very strong analogy. The virtual presence is something that can stand in for, can serve real presence, but there's always a danger, as there is in a very shiny ring, that we become obsessed with the replacement. We become obsessed with the stand-in, and we have the disorder of the turning away from the thing that really matters, that the virtual should have been a servant of in the first place. Friendship is always about living together. It's always about presence, about real presence. Let's keep asking ourselves, what is real human presence? Perhaps we can even go to our Lord in the Eucharist and ask Him to help us think about this in the context of His obvious emphasizing of bodily presence. Dare I even suggest the comparison between that real presence and any other presence that we would not call real. And wrapping up, I want to say again, what's the key principle? The tool is judged in view of the end it serves. Virtual presence, communication, social media should be judged in terms of, does it serve real presence? At certain times, we're going to have to use technologies that maybe in the abstract or in better circumstances we wouldn't want to use. Certain times maybe we wouldn't have to, but we should, and we'll judge it's fitting to use certain technologies. Again, that maybe in different circumstances we would not have used. In either case, we should always bear in mind its limitations and its dangers. Let's avoid especially the danger of kind of becoming obsessed with that we can do this. So often we get just absorbed in that we have this power. There's so many temptations here to watch out for. They can be reasonably used. Let's learn to use them reasonably. Let's learn when we need to abstain from them or limit them, even at great cost or inconvenience. Virtuous friendship, again, I suggest, should be like marriage and family as a primordial instance of life-sharing presence. To the extent the virtual presence can truly serve it, let's use it in the service of the real. To the extent that it distracts or detracts, replaces or undermines, it must be set aside in the name of the reality of real presence. Thanks for listening.
Well, Professor Kodak, thanks very much for an excellent lecture on virtuous virtual friendship. So we now have a little bit of time for some questions from our virtual audience. The first is anonymous, even. So someone from Zoom asks, in view of the widespread abuse of social media, does it make sense to simply renounce the use of social media for the sake of cultivating true friendship?
Great question. And I think that the answer to that is going to be sometimes yes and sometimes no. I am not willing at this point to say that it's my judgment. Again, the more you get in the concrete particularities, we could talk about, discuss, we could disagree. Here I'm going to share my view. I think we need, I go back to the principle, to the extent that you understand the dangers of it and you're aware of it, that makes you much more of a good candidate to possibly use it well. So some people, particularly if we find subjectively that it is weakening our relationships, that it's just being a source of temptation for us, that it's not really having any great positive effect, absolutely, I'm all for shutting it down and moving on. I think for any number of people that is absolutely a good idea, the right thing to do. But at the same time, the reality is, and we can't deny this, that there's certain kinds of communication that go on there, a sharing of information that right now it would be very difficult to do anywhere else. This is part of the tricky thing. We have to live in the world in which we are. I say it openly. There's several technologies that I use, that I'm using because I'm convinced that it's where people are, and I want to try to go to them and be there with them, because I'm not sure where else I would find them. Does this contradict what I said? I don't think it does, as long as I bear in mind the priority of the real and of real presence. And bear in mind, my reflections were basically about going towards true friendship. I think there's more of a place for instance, what we're doing right now, not to be pert, but I'm not seeking at the moment to be true friends with people in my listening audience. I'm just making a lecture. And at this point, that's coming through on social media might just mean that this is a reasonable platform to try to share some of these thoughts. Thanks for asking.
Okay, how about this? Some more general question about technology. So it's often said that technology is morally neutral. It has to do with the person who's using it, whether it is good or evil. But the question is, could there be technologies which inherently encourage evil? This anonymous questioner raises the example of Twitter for some reason. Okay. Or something that is antithetical to true human life, true friendship.
This is a great question, and it's a tricky one. Here, there were some things in Pope Francis's Laudato Si that I deeply appreciated, where he spoke of technologies that have, I'm trying to remember the wording, but I'll be able to convey the point, that they might in themselves be technically morally neutral in the sense that there could be a good usage or a bad usage. In that sense, you can't say that any usage of it is necessarily bad. So it's morally neutral, but that doesn't mean that there aren't certain kind of intrinsic tendencies of this kind of medium, this type of technology, to kind of draw you towards things that are maybe less human. And so I think that social media fits very much into that. I do think there's an intrinsic tendency within the use of social media towards the more shallow. This is part of when I say there's a danger to it, that's different than saying there's a danger to a knife. Knives are great tools. And it's just, yep, you got to know how to use it. I would not say the same thing. I need to make a distinction. I wouldn't say, okay, knife can be used well, used badly. Social media can be used well, used badly. No, it's more nuanced than that. I still do think social media can be used well, but you could still have a tendency in it by its essence that it encourages, say, a certain shallowness. That doesn't mean that that tendency will always come to fruition in making anyone who uses it be shallow, but still that that particularly, again, to the one who's not aware, that will tend to draw them along that way. Look, email. There's a tendency within email. I mean, we've all seen this, haven't we? More and more, it becomes more short, more curt, less formal, less rich, less sharing. And there's all kinds of interesting questions as to why. I think it's worth listening to those people who say things like there's something about the tactile aspect of paper and pen. You know, we're bodily beings. These things are not to be ignored. Those things need to be considered more. I'm going to leave that at that and say great for further discussion.
Okay, excellent. Someone is asking just for more information about your book, True Friendship, and maybe you could talk a little bit about that and if it will be more widely available.
Good. Well, it is widely available, I'm happy to say. Ignatius, it was originally published by a smaller publisher. It's been republished by Ignatius Press, so it's available at ignatius.com. It's also referenced at my website, Life, as you mentioned earlier. Thank you, Father. Life-craft.org. This is a new version of the book, and I go into trying to distill the key insights of the different kinds of friendship and helping to give the principles how to think about making an intentional plan to cultivate the different kinds of friendship, most of all virtuous friendship in our life in the kind of challenging context that we are now. So I appreciate that question.
All right, great. And here's a good one from Lisa Stingley on Zoom.
All right.
Can you comment on the effect of virtual education on students in this pandemic age, and especially in the primary grades, and maybe on the effect that this is having, in your opinion or speculation, on the teacher-student relationship?
Great question. And I'd say probably the intuition behind the question, I think, is probably right. In other words, this is one of those things where, I mean, what exactly, it's difficult to say exactly what concretely should be done. These are hard issues of, all right, what if the state mandates that we can't have in-person education? Am I going to go to do certain things virtually if there's no other way I can do it? Yes, indeed, I am. Right? I'm not going to kind of stand on the principle of this is lesser. This can have a tendency to weaken, to banalize, to not develop so well. The relationship between teacher and students, the various powers of the student of engaging, of entering into the issue, of living in the presence. I mean, what a human thing. What a great way to be humanly present. I love being in the classroom with my students where you can feel each other, right? You know you're in this together. We're a little community there with a common good. There's so much richness that is more evident in the flesh that needs to be recognized, and why we need to be big proponents of valuing more highly than our society currently is among the hierarchy of things. Right? I absolutely think we're not recognizing, hey, in the name of these other things, we're saying, oh, okay, we're just going to put off in person. I think that's a mistake. Without getting too much into the controversy, let's say in certain contexts, for the sake of health or so forth, might it be the case that you'd go virtual for X length of time? Of course, depending on circumstances. But we need to have a deeper, richer sense of how it does undermine, clearly is undermining, is a less ideal. And I think if we valued that more, we would be more proactive about getting people into the physical presence of one another. And frankly, a whole lot of other things too, right? That's just the tip of the iceberg, all the other ways that we're using virtual things in education anyway. Even when kids are in the classrooms, very often they're connected to virtual things. So to become more aware of the tactile, the visual, the bodily presence, the natural, being in the natural world, crafting with our hands. So many technologies separate us from our bodies. That's a Wendell Berry point. I need to give him credit. It's gloriously insightful. So many technologies separate us. In the name of supposedly uniting us, they separate us from our bodies. They make us experience ourselves, in some ways, act as a disembodied spirit. That we are not. An Aristotelian is not. A Christian has such a strong sense of the incarnational aspect of human nature, not just to mention God taking it on. So, sorry, I just kind of went big on that. I'll stop there, Father.
Okay. Let's see, do we have, I think we have time for maybe a brief final question.
All right.
I mean, it's a bit specific. So Kathy from Zoom asks, how often do you have to meet in person to go forward into true friendship?
Hey, great, there's nothing, because it comes down to the particularities. So I say, great question. There's nothing wrong with asking that question as long as you're ready that I'm not going to give an exact number. But of course, it's 8 times. Just kidding. I'd say this is where I take the question extremely seriously. I'd say use your best judgment, and I'd put it. I just kind of turn it this way. Do all that you can to put a priority on real presence. Again, what did I already suggest? In judging the virtual presence and how it fits, always be seeing it as a tool. Always be seeing it as an instrument that is for the sake of, does it enhance? Is it ultimately undermining my ability to be more bodily present? Or am I trying to maintain something that's not realistic? I think at times technology makes us think we have powers that we don't. Don't try to be friends with more people than you can be friends with. Don't try to go deeper where it's not realistic to go deeper, because at the end of the day, it needs to be in bodily presence. Is there a reasonable hope here of going deeper? Quick distinction. If we're talking about keeping up with someone that we already have lived much of our life with, I mean, out of piety towards it, I think it's appropriate to stay in contact. Although, again, sometimes even there, trying to stay in touch with those who are away can pull us away from the present. Some of these technologies are taking us out of our body, kind of out of the presence. I always tell the story of when I was a parent, even just the telephone. Why is it that our little children, they intuited when Daddy's on the phone, he's not with me, and they start yelling and screaming and throwing things and biting and kicking and pulling at your pants because they're like, you're supposed to be here with me, Daddy, and they're right. So we need to be careful about being taken away from the present and trying to maintain those relationships out there. Be realistic about there needs to be a reasonable amount of in the fleshness. One thing when you're maintaining something from the past, but I'd be very, very careful about starting relationships, and then we've got to end, starting relationships where you don't have much hope that you're going to be able to be in the bodily presence much. It depends. That's not an absolute, but I'd say put a priority on it, make it happen as much as possible, and direct your energies towards it. Thanks for the great question.